I couldn't see myself going through chemo again. That was really, it's not the operation for it, it's not any of that, it's the chemo that really gets you.
Many people are crazy about the Osbournes, believing the reality show they watched was the whole story. But that was just a carefully edited glimpse. The real story of Sharon Osbourne is far darker and more tragic than any television producer would dare to show. You see, the battles she won in public, against cancer, against critics, against the industry, were nothing compared to the wars she fought in private.
I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer, and it was in my lymph nodes as well, and it had spread.
Now, at 72, the longest and hardest war has come to a devastating end, leaving fans in tears and the world asking how they missed the signs of her most profound heartbreak. A promise kept. You see, for a woman whose life was defined by noise, the silence was the most terrifying part. Sharon Osbourne, at 72 years old, found herself in a world without the one sound that had been its constant, chaotic heartbeat for over 5 decades: Ozzy. The final years were a quiet storm of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and the slow, heartbreaking fade of a legend. The public saw glimpses, but they missed the profound tragedy unfolding behind the mansion doors. It all truly began to unravel with a fall in 2019. It sounds so simple, a household accident. But for Ozzy, already battling the creeping shadows of Parkinson's disease, it was catastrophic. The fall led to a cascade of surgeries, each one chipping away at the man who once commanded stadiums. He was left in immense, constant physical pain, a prisoner in his own body. Many people are crazy about the wow factor of a rock star's life, but the thing nobody tells you is about the quiet agony that often follows. For instance, more than 16 million Americans suffer from chronic back pain like Ozzy's, but his was complicated by a pre-existing condition that turned a common ailment into a life-altering sentence. Sharon became his full-time caregiver. This was the woman who had managed his career, fought off his demons, and raised his children, now tasked with the most intimate and heartbreaking job of all. The days were a blur of medications, physical therapy, and the simple, painful effort of getting through another day. Then, in January of 2020, they made the public announcement: Ozzy had Parkinson's. It was a confirmation of what many had suspected, but hearing the words made it real, and it made his frailty a public spectacle. The world was then plunged into the pandemic, and the Osbournes were not spared. Both Sharon and Ozzy contracted the virus, a terrifying prospect for two people with already compromised health. It was another battle in a seemingly endless war. Yet through it all, Sharon orchestrated one final roar for the lion in winter. In what was a truly monumental effort, she planned Ozzy's final concert in his hometown of Birmingham. This wasn't just a gig, it was a farewell. It was his last chance to stand on a stage, the place where he was most alive. He was frail, his body failing him, but for that one night, he was the Prince of Darkness again. The energy it took was immense, but it was a necessary goodbye. Then came the final, inevitable day. On July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne passed away with Sharon by his side. The world mourned a rock god, but Sharon lost, in her own words, her other half. The silence that followed was, as she described, unbearable. It was the end of an era, not just in music, but in her own life. A life she had dedicated entirely to him, from the moment she chose to manage him and defy her own father. The tragedy wasn't just his passing, but the crushing weight of the silence he left behind. But this final act was built on a lifetime of public triumphs and private turmoil, a reality TV nightmare. But not all things are what they seem. Long before the quiet tragedy of Ozzy's final years, the Osbournes lived their lives in the full glare of the public eye, a decision that made them icons but cost them dearly. In the early 2000s, a new kind of television was taking over, and the Osbournes were its unlikely pioneers. The show, simply titled The Osbournes, was a sensation. It pulled back the curtain on the chaotic, hilarious, and surprisingly relatable life of a rock and roll family. It premiered on MTV and instantly became one of the most watched shows in the network's history. The wow factor here is staggering. At its peak, the show drew in nearly 8 million viewers an episode. To put that in perspective, that's more people than the entire population of the state of Washington watching their every move, every week. They were paid a fortune, with Ozzy reportedly earning a salary of $20 million for the first 2 seasons alone. It turned Sharon, once a behind-the-scenes music manager, into a global celebrity in her own right. She was funny, fierce, and brutally honest. The world fell in love with her. However, the thing nobody tells you about living in a fishbowl is that the glass eventually cracks. The show, which made them famous, began to erode the boundaries between their public personas and their private lives. Every argument, every tear, every moment of vulnerability was packaged for public consumption. Their children, Jack and Kelly, grew up with cameras documenting their awkward teenage years, their struggles, and their mistakes. Private heartbreaks became public content, and the pressure was immense. The cost was astronomical. The constant scrutiny magnified their existing problems. Jack and Kelly's struggles with addiction, which might have been handled privately in another family, became headline news. The very chaos that made the show so entertaining was a real and damaging force within their home. Sharon later admitted the show was a double-edged sword. It brought them incredible success, but it also put a strain on their family that was nearly unbearable. They had traded their privacy for fame, and it was a deal with the devil that had long-lasting consequences. Years later, this public persona would come back to haunt Sharon in the most brutal way. In 2021, during a heated on-air exchange on the show The Talk, she found herself at the center of a massive public scandal. In the blink of an eye, the beloved television mom was branded a villain. The backlash was swift and severe, and it almost broke her. She was a public figure, and her life was picked apart by strangers. It was a stark reminder that the fame she had cultivated had a dark side, a side that could turn on her in an instant. The golden cage of reality television had become a prison. This public trial, however, was nothing compared to the private hell she had already endured. A war on 2 fronts. You see, the year 2002 should have been a time of triumph for Sharon Osbourne. At 50 years old, she was a household name, the star of a hit television show, and the matriarch of a beloved family. But instead, it became her trial by fire, a year when she was forced to fight for her own life while her world crumbled around her. It began with 3 words that would change everything. You have cancer. A diagnosis of colon cancer was a terrifying blow. The wow factor in this fight is her incredible resilience. The survival rate for stage 3 colon cancer, which had spread to her lymph nodes, was less than 40% at the time. The odds were stacked against her. She immediately began a grueling regimen of chemotherapy. The treatment was brutal, ravaging her body and leaving her weak and exhausted, but she refused to surrender. She even allowed the cameras from the Osbournes to document her battle, a decision that was both incredibly brave and a testament to her raw honesty. She wanted to demystify the disease and show the world the unvarnished reality of fighting cancer. But as she was fighting for her own life, a different kind of horror struck. Ozzy, in a moment of reckless abandon on his estate in England, had a near-fatal ATV crash. The accident was horrific. He was left shattered with a broken collarbone, 8 fractured ribs, and a damaged vertebra in his neck. He was rushed to the hospital, his life hanging by a thread. For a time, he was entirely dependent on machines to survive. Sharon was now living a nightmare on 2 fronts. She would leave her own chemotherapy sessions and go straight to Ozzy's bedside, a warrior weakened by her own battle, now fighting for her husband's life as well. The thing nobody tells you is the sheer mental and physical toll of such a crisis. It's a weight that would crush most people. But the tragedies of that year weren't finished. While she and Ozzy were fighting their respective battles, her children were spiraling. The pressures of fame had taken a heavy toll. Her son Jack succumbed to addiction, and her daughter Kelly's own struggles with pills and alcohol deepened. Sharon was now fighting a war on three fronts: her cancer, Ozzy's recovery, and the desperate struggle to save her children from their own demons. It was a period of unimaginable stress and heartbreak, a true test of her spirit. And just 10 years later, in 2012, fearing her genetic history, she would make the agonizing decision to undergo a preventive double mastectomy, another profound sacrifice to ensure she would be there for her family. This period proved Sharon's strength, but it also exposed the deep cracks in their foundation, cracks that would lead to the ultimate betrayal. A lifetime of scars. So you look at all this, the illness, the accidents, the public shamings, and you have to wonder, right? Does this kind of thing just happen overnight? For the average person looking in, it seems like a whirlwind of chaos that just appeared with the TV show. But the thing is, we're missing the key details, the beginning of the story. The truth is, the heartbreaking tragedy of Sharon Osbourne's life didn't start in her 70s. It began in the shadow of a man they called the Al Capone of pop. She was born into a world of power and fear. Her father, Don Arden, was a notorious music mogul, a man known for his brutal business tactics. The stories about him were legendary. He was said to have dangled rivals from balconies and employed thugs to enforce his contracts. He managed huge acts like the Small Faces and Electric Light Orchestra, building an empire on talent and intimidation. This was the world Sharon grew up in, a world where business was everything and affection was in short supply. Then, when she was just 6 years old, her mother died in a tragic car accident. It was a profound loss that hollowed out her world and taught her a hard lesson early on. Survival meant being tough. There was simply no room for weakness in Don Arden's house. Then Ozzy came along. She was working for her father when she met him, a chaotic force of nature in the band Black Sabbath. She fell in love not just with the man, but with his raw, undeniable talent. So, when Ozzy was fired from the band for his out-of-control behavior, Sharon made a choice that would detonate her life. She decided to manage him herself and build his solo career. To her father, this wasn't just a business move, it was a declaration of war. Don, who had a stake in Ozzy's former band, saw it as the ultimate betrayal. The clash was fierce, leading to years of bitter silence. He cut her off completely, disinheriting her from a fortune worth millions and severing their family ties. She chose Ozzy over everything, a decision that would define the rest of her life. And what a life it was. She took a man who was, by all accounts, a complete wreck. He was battling severe addiction, he was financially ruined, and his reputation was in tatters. She bet her entire soul on him. The early years were a constant tightrope walk between the stage and the emergency room. The thing nobody tells you is that the infamous stories, like the Bat incident, weren't just wild rock antics. They were signs of the deep-seated chaos she was trying to manage every single day. She was raising a family and a legend at the same time, dealing with his near overdoses and the private terror that came with loving an addict. Then, after decades of fighting for him, came the deepest cut of all. In 2016, she discovered Ozzy had been unfaithful. After everything she had sacrificed, her family, her fortune, her own well-being, this betrayal completely shattered her. It wasn't just a private matter, it became a public humiliation. It led to a brief separation and a profound depression that she struggled to hide. There was even a terrifying night when Ozzy, consumed by his illness and addictions, turned on her, a moment so frightening that it required police intervention. They reconciled, but the scar remained. What do you think is the true definition of strength? Is it the battles you win or the ones you survive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines. Was Sharon's life a rock and roll dream or a cautionary tale?